I'm Laurie Axman with the Penn Center for Innovation, and we're very happy to be launching our speaker series kind of for the year today, focused on commercialization topics. And our role at the university is meant to support and facilitate commercialization. We work with faculty and some students across the university. So we have a broad focus. And without further ado, I wanted to introduce and thank our first speaker this year, who is Barbara Schilberg, the Managing Director of BioAdvance. She has been a longtime partner and supporter of ours, so thank you, Barbara, and brings over 30 years of expertise working with early stage life sciences companies, including those from academia. So she knows Penn and other universities well, and in terms of kind of how to work with us and what to look for if you're an early stage innovator based at a university. And she always provides excellent insights and is very generous with her time around trends and what she's seeing in life science investing. So Barbara, thank you, and I'll hand it over to you.
I'm going to touch on just a couple topics today. I will update you on what I see going on in the national and the regional venture landscape. I'll also briefly mention what BioAdvance is up to these days. And I'll close with just sort of what the three key issues are that anybody who's raising money has to think about because they matter to investors. And then we will leave Q&A at the end. So, but before I launch into it, I do think it's useful just to step back. I know you're going to have a lecture later in the fall on Venture Capital 101. I think somebody from Osage, right, Laurie?
Yeah.
So I won't get into too much detail, but just to give you sort of a little bit of a framework. Venture capital, I think the best way to think about it is it's adventure capital. It's like the treasure hunters who are going after gold. They're taking on a lot of risk, but they hope to see a big reward at the end. And the goal is to beat the returns you can get from public markets. And that's why it exists. The money comes from pension funds, endowments, wealthy individuals, family-owned businesses, that sort of thing. But they don't actually make the investments themselves. They give it to investment professionals who are called the venture capitalists, who organize it into funds. And then those are the people who make the investments. So the owners of the money are actually passive. It's the people who manage the funds that are the active investors. And these funds have a 10-year life. The idea is you invest the money fairly rapidly, 1 to 3 years. And then the venture capitalist has to go out and raise another fund while it's still managing the earlier investments from the original fund. So there's a constant, venture funds, frankly, are always raising money. And you can tell who's successful by how many funds they have under their belt. So if somebody's raising their 12th fund, that means they've done a fantastic job over the years. And they're the ones who have a tremendous track record. I think a lot of people, new managers come out, they raise their first fund, they can maybe even raise their second fund with a vision. But if they don't produce returns, oftentimes they don't even make it to fund 3. So there is a definite have and have nots, and you can tell who's successful and who isn't. Okay, so that's it for it. Now, I can't overstate how important venture capital is to our lives and to our economy. So venture capital backed Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, and look at what they've done today in the healthcare field. It's the Regenerons of the world and Modernas were all venture backed. In healthcare, the role of venture capital has been so important since the 1980s, really, late 70s, early 80s, because it steps in after the taxpayer pays for inventions in academic labs. That's through the NIH grants and NSF grants. Then venture capital was the key intermediary to actually move the technology or the invention far enough along down the commercialization path that then the company could go public or maybe get acquired by a bigger company with more resources. And then they would access the public and they would access other resources at that point. And when companies are either acquired or go public, that's when the venture capitalists get to recognize their returns. So they may have been sitting on money for 7 to 9 years, 10, 12 years. But once the company goes public or is acquired, the venture capitalists get to sell their stock, and that's how they get their returns. And how they do at that point is key. Okay, so if you're reading the headlines, it's not just raining money, it is pouring money. As Laurie said, I've been in this business for 35 years now, and I've never seen anything like it. So if you look at the numbers, and this is going to break, we're going to break the chart this time around. So the title is, it's healthcare venture is soaring. In just 6 months, which is the hash bar, there's been money coming into the healthcare sector in the form of venture capital that matches last year's total year investments. And last year was a record year. So it's insane what's going on and how much money is coming into the venture capital world and how much money is available to invest. So why is that happening? I think, my view is this trend, which has been increasing for 10 years now, is because the public markets are strong. And when the public markets are doing well, venture-backed companies can go public at high valuations, venture capitalists make money, the people who gave them the money are all excited and they want to put even more back into the venture funds. So everybody, it's just a cumulative, nice self-reinforcing cycle where more and more money is coming in because more and more people are making money. And I don't really see it changing as long as valuations stay high. I don't see this trend. It may stabilize. I don't know about the trajectory, but I don't see it changing dramatically, short of a big catastrophe in the world. But even
Barbara,
COVID didn't stop it. Yep.
I mean, that's really amazing news.
It is amazing.
Coming from you, of course, eminently credible. Not to be a downer, but is there any, from your is there any downside to this? Are there any people trying to get in the space who are kind of...
You shouldn't be.
Yeah, or...
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So
there's
you don't
a ton
talk about it now necessarily, but...
I'll touch on that because it's, when I talk about different kinds of investors that are coming into the space.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it's a very good question. And I read a staggering number, that $150 billion was available in venture capital at the beginning of 2021 to be invested. I just can't even wrap my head around it. So I just don't see it, even if it trails into 2022. I think for the next year or two, there's still going to be a ton of money.
Wow.
The trick, though, is that everybody has to keep up high valuations, and that's always the unknown. So if the public markets start getting tired or anxious, those valuations are going to go down, and then the whole cycle almost goes in reverse, and it becomes a spiral down. So, and the headwinds, though, and I don't, maybe they're not red flags. It's kind of yellow flags. Is that if you look at the sky where the rain is coming down, raining money, the showers are really focused on Massachusetts, California, and New York. And the rest of the country maybe has light showers, and some are even in a drought condition. So it is very geographically concentrated. I say in the slide, 74% of the capital invested in 2020 was in those three geographies. Actually, 85% of the capital that was available are in funds located in those three jurisdictions. So lots of concentration. The other phenomenon is that capital is concentrated in larger financing. So there's a fairly new, over the last couple of years, there's been a phenomenon called mega rounds, which are over $100 million. Those never happened 10 years ago. And now almost half of the venture capital in 2020 went into mega rounds, which means it's a relatively small number of companies are getting major amounts of capital in these financings. So it's concentrated in companies. The venture funds themselves, they're actually, traditional venture funds are not significantly increasing in number. But as I said, the more money they make, the larger their next fund gets, because all of their investors want to see more, want to put more money to work. So the funds are getting bigger and bigger. They're not getting more numerous. The other trend that I think is real competition, if you're just here in Philadelphia starting a new company, venture funds, because they have so much capital to commit, they have to guarantee a source of deal flow, because they can't just take a chance that some really cool company walks over the transom that they like. And so they are now going out and looking for really cool technology. They're bringing in their own management teams that they trust. They create their own companies, and essentially they're investing in themselves. So that's happening more and more with the traditional funds, who want to just make sure they have a deal flow to absorb the money, all the money they're raising. So you have to be aware of that, and it's hard to compete with somebody's own kid, own baby. So, now on the plus side, but it's also the challenge, there's lots of new kinds of money, new kinds of investors, more money. Some of it's smart, some of it's not. So if you look at the list of new investors, disease foundations used to just make grants into academic labs. Now they're making investments into small companies. So they're a whole new source of capital. They are smart capital because they have, great networks of expertise around the science. And some of them, like the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, have done very well, have made incredible impact on both the patient population, and they've made money for themselves. So good for them. Family offices maybe used to just do index funds. These are rich families that inherited wealth, maybe from a successful company. And maybe they used to just do passive investing and index funds and things like that in the public markets. They're now organizing their own little mini venture funds to come to, and some of them are interested in disease areas, and some are just want to make money. Angel groups are getting bigger and bigger. They're writing more meaningful checks, which is a wonderful new phenomenon. Accelerators, I think, are incredibly important in our ecosystem. They don't have a lot of money to invest, but they have a lot of guidance. And they will touch on it, like the iCore, Dream It Health, Y Combinator. You've heard probably some of the names of accelerators. I think they're really valuable. Health systems, Penn being a notable exception. A lot of health systems are creating their own venture funds with sort of strategic goals. And then the other thing that's happening is private equity, which is late stage money. Usually it comes in right before a company goes public, but they're now attracted by venture capital returns. So they're now moving earlier. Hedge funds, crazy kinds of people who have a lot of money to invest, and they're moving earlier in the space. So it's but they all have their pluses and minuses. So it is both, as I said, it's both an opportunity because there's new kinds of money, but you also have to understand the goals of each of these different kinds of investors. And so now the landscape looks like this. You don't really have to do a straight line from the academic lab to traditional venture capital to an IPO or public markets or an acquisition. You can make any number of stops along the way, especially at the early stages. And you may want to get an investment from a disease foundation, or you can get even the NIH and government programs are going later stage. They're funding clinical trials, not just research. So you can put together a whole financing plan now that really helps de-risk your technology and improve the valuation before you even get to venture capital, which I think is a positive thing. So one of our companies called Venatorix, which is local, they're in the infectious disease space, but they did a friends and family round early on, which we participated in. And then they took 6 years. They raised, I think, $100 million of non-dilutive capital from the NIH, BARDA, DOD, that sort of thing. They built out their pipeline. They moved their lead program into the clinic. And then they went to raise venture capital. And by then they got top tier investors, raised what was at the time a significant amount of money, which no longer is. But so they deliberately didn't want to go to venture capital until they could increase the value of their company. And it's good for the teams who do that. So we encourage it. The trick is, and I'll talk a little bit about the trick of how do you find these people. let's see. So let's talk about what's going on in the Philadelphia region. And the good news is it resembles the national picture. So just for the 6 months, this is all healthcare, all stages. For the first 6 months, we are matching not the number of deals, but the amount of money that has gone into, that went into our region in 2020. So that's a real positive. It sort of tells me that the rising tide lifts all boats. Now, the number of deals, if we keep on track, we'll double the number of deals as well. So, I think it's all positive. And again, I don't know where the end in sight is. So, but the challenge we face locally in this region is that we've never, ever had a really significant investor base that is local. And if you look at this chart, you can see there's been some progress, and I'm very encouraged by seeing some of these trends. Now, this is all sectors. It's not just healthcare investors. I haven't actually figured out who the 40 new investors are in Pennsylvania in 2019 that didn't exist in 2018. But in Delaware, it's like, I don't know what's going on in Delaware, but now all of a sudden, they really increased their investor base. But if you look at this realistically, the money is in New York. It's not even in Boston. I mean, there is a ton of money in Boston, but New York is really the heartbeat, and it's only an hour and a half away. So that is the moral of the story. When you look at who the investors are locally, we are heavy on angel investors and light on venture investors. So it's good to touch base with local investors, but don't count on them as the main source of financing. So you really have to think about going elsewhere or attracting money from other locations. And the angels have been very active. And I think in terms of number of deals, they've probably done more deals than venture funds here. So it's a good thing. And PCI knows all these people. So I think PCI is your best contact for if you want to get in front of these groups, they'll know. And we're also happy to help you, but PCI is very familiar with everybody on this page. Now I was a little concerned last year because Series A deals, which is the very first round of financing, well, it's maybe the first round of financing. Sometimes seed financings are the first. But Series A financings were down last year locally. They were also down nationally. So I don't think it was counter to the trend. And I think the good news is that nationally Series A deals are still kind of down. And we seem to be coming up. So we're counter to the national trend, which I think is great news. And I hope we can keep it up for the rest of the year, because it'll be a strong year for beginning companies. Because to me, you want to have a whole new generation of companies every year, because then they go out and raise even more money the next year, and it just sort of keeps adding to the story. And if all of a sudden you don't have any new companies getting started, then the story is going to dwindle over the next couple of years. So this was actually kind of a key finding when we updated the numbers.
Barbara, can I pause you?
Sure.
We have a question in the chat.
Okay.
How do the number of active investors correlate with the success of the funds? Do we see better performing?
Yeah.
Okay,
that's actually a really good question. No, because the number of investors would not go up if it was just current investors who are raising a new fund. What it looks like from that table, and like I said, I've got to do some homework to figure out who all these new investors are. They have to be new funds like that hadn't existed before. So it's not really, it's new sources of money, basically. It's not an experienced team that's just raising their second fund. Because if that were happening, the number would stay flat. So now, I also don't know if some of these are tech funds. They may be family offices. It's an interesting story, and it's something I do want to take a look at myself. And I'm particularly fascinated about Delaware, because I don't understand how they could raise, how there could be 50 new funds, basically, or 50 new investors in Delaware in just a year. So that's pretty staggering. These are some of the Series A deals that have been happening, and Penn is very well represented. I think Neuroflow is a behavioral health, digital health. Interius is Sargill's cell therapy company, is second or third. I don't know. I can't even, I'm losing track. And then you see Vestech, we just invested in, is a med tech company. iView is actually a repurposed molecule for ophthalmic. Vespine, I can't even remember what they are. But it's a nice diversity. It shows that we're not 100% cell and gene therapy, which I always worry about if we get too focused. But so I think it's a nice diversity locally that's coming out, emerging onto the scene. So what's hot and what's not? This is sort of a subjective list on my part. I think gene and cell therapies continue to be really popular, both here and in the country at large. I think particularly because there's been a success with CRISPR. I think gene editing is actually coming on strong. Gene therapy, I think, is almost stronger than cell therapies. I detect a little bit of cooling off on the cell therapy side. I think people have placed their bets. A lot of the big funds have placed their bets with their cell therapy companies. And I think they're kind of waiting to see how those play out. So I don't see as much new activity happening on the cell therapy side. Platform companies are super popular. Platform just means it's a technological approach that can be used in multiple products and over again, and gives you a lot of ways to invest money, especially the big funds who have to put 20 or $50 million into a financing at a time. They really need to put it into companies that can, usefully use that money. And if it's a single asset in a single company, it just doesn't fit sort of the new venture model. So platform companies are really popular, and it's almost universal that it's a platform company that's getting funded these days. Telehealth, even though reimbursement is changing and CMS, there's a lot of confusion about what's going to be paid and what's not. I think telehealth is here to stay. I think investors think it's here to stay. There's particularly a focus now on the mental health, behavioral health side of the world. And you see a lot of startups and a lot of investment going into the mental health, which is terrific. So Neuroflow is an example, which is the Penn spin out. I think there's a little bit of cooling off on the immuno-oncology side because it's so competitive these days. Everybody has a checkpoint inhibitor. Then there are millions of different combinations with checkpoint inhibitors. And it's just very hard for investors to even understand the landscape, to get their arms around it. So you have to have a really compelling story to rise above the noise in immuno-oncology. And some funds are just saying we aren't even going to look at IO for the time being. We're going to pause it for another year or two and see how things shake out. Rare diseases, I don't mean it's cooling off in terms of a reduction of deals. I think it's probably relative though to other areas of interest. It's sort of interesting. I think now there's a trend towards pharma and therefore venture funds looking at how do we tackle common diseases that we've kind of neglected for the last 10 years with new modalities like mRNA. And how do we deploy some of these new technological advances towards bigger disease areas with the unmet need? So I think that's what's sort of offsetting the rare disease focus. And what's not, we are still in a pandemic and people still don't want to fund infectious disease companies. It's been going on for years. And there are a lot of reasons for it. But you saw how important the government is in funding infectious disease and the role they played in the COVID solutions, the vaccines that came through, and they're funding most of the treatment development and clinical trials of repurposed drugs. So thank heavens for the federal government. They're trying to bring in legislation to create economic incentives to companies to do more infectious disease work. It's just a big uphill battle. So it's sad. What can I say? Diagnostics. I think if you have a single biomarker that you want to develop as a diagnostic, I think that's very, very, very difficult. I think the big, sexy plays are the grails of the world that are trying to identify how many, it must be like 50 cancers in a single blood test. Those are still attracting investment dollars. the single biomarkers are not. I think the COVID devices, there are so many, the COVID diagnostic devices, there are so many that are floating around. Again, I think the private sector is letting the public sector sort of figure it out rather than dipping their toe too much into even COVID diagnostics.
Barbara,
Yep.
quick question. What about like medical marijuana and psychedelics? I noticed Philadelphia is getting a new clinic.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we are staying out of the cannabis space, but I do get probably 2 or 3 investment bankers who are pitching cannabis companies a day or a week, I should say. We don't think cannabis is proven. So we just don't think, we think there's just a lot of hype, a lot of junk, a lot of people racing who are greedy and just want to get in on the bandwagon. So we're staying out of it, although there is a lot. I think the psychedelic space, I think, is fascinating. Neurology in general, I think, is coming back. It cycles through, it's in and out, in and out. I think the psychedelic space, frankly, is fascinating because I think there is something to it. So I think that it's pretty niche-y still, but I think it's real.
Let's see. What's your perspective on the neuro space post Agile?
Yeah. I'm seeing signs of life in Alzheimer's, even in Alzheimer's, which is the first time in 5 years. I do see the neurodegenerative diseases. People are still tackling Parkinson's, for one thing. ALS, I even see, which was kind of completely a cemetery, and it has been a graveyard for money. But I think people are willing to take a chance on ALS again. Alzheimer's, I think the Aduhelm approval did help. So I see signs of life. I wouldn't say it's a trend yet, but I do see signs of life. And as long as they're, it's all about the science in the neurodegenerative diseases. You have to be able to explain why you know more than people did 5 years ago to justify the approach you're taking. And if you have good science and a reasonable, I think people, it's a huge area of unmet need, and it's probably the biggest area of unmet need in our lives. So I think people are willing to take a chance, and there's enough money now that they can take a chance. So a couple things working in its favor. So strike while the iron is hot. I won't belabor this. So I think it's mostly green lights. COVID was just a hiccup. There's tons of money floating around. I think it's going to continue for a year or two. I do worry a little bit about first-time financings being down. Seed angel investing has decreased. I don't think that's happened in either of these 2 yellow lights are in Philadelphia, interestingly. And I do worry that there aren't a lot of new venture funds coming on board, meaning new managers that have never been venture capitalists before. So that has also decreased. So it's kind of, in the venture world, the rich are getting richer. It's like people who've done it, been there, done that, are getting all the money, not giving the newcomers a chance. So I do worry about that a little. So I think, what does it all mean for you? So it's a really interesting time to be raising money if you're out thinking about putting together a company. But the challenge is finding the right kind of investor for what you need. And it's very much like a dating game. And it's kind of like, it's like a dating game. How do you filter through everything to figure out where the right pool of candidates is? And I think the first step is just really practical. You got to figure out how much money you need before you can even start looking for a venture fund. And you figure out how much money you need. It's an art. So you need some help, and PCI is good at doing stuff like this. And so you have to identify what the de-risking steps are or the value creation steps are, and then figure out how much money you need to get to those different milestones, and preferably over the next 3 years or so. You don't have to forecast into forever, but just over the next couple of years. So in therapeutics, getting to first in humans is a big value inflection point, and it'll tell you something about safety. It may even tell you something about efficacy. So that's a no-brainer if you can get that far. But even short of that, in the therapeutic space, there are some lesser de-risking steps, like getting in vivo proof of concept from one or more reliable predictive models. Getting tox is a de-risking step. In the cell and gene therapy world, interestingly, getting a meeting with the FDA and getting the FDA buy-in to your plan is actually very valuable. And some investors want to get you that, want to see you get that far so that you've spoken to the FDA, you know the regulatory path, you know what has to happen with manufacturing, and you can actually predict what your development plan looks like. So that can be a de-risking step. I think on the digital health side, it's how much money does it take to get you to $1 million in revenue, or 5 million in revenue, or 10 million in revenue. It tends to be more revenue based or profitability based when you're really getting further out. So you need some help. You'll need to talk to some people to figure out. You need to ask questions like, what is the next value creation, or that I need to be thinking about, and then figure out how much money you need. So once you do that, that is a huge filter in finding the kind of fund that fits what you need. If you haven't heard the message so far, it's like you cannot look inside the region and expect to get everything inside the region. You've got to look outside the region. It's great to touch base with all of us who are here locally, but you've got to have a plan for attracting and meeting investors who are outside. And then I think it's really important to pursue non-traditional investors and sources of capital. I think, especially at the early stage, I think it's going to be you're going to get the most traction with non-traditional investors, because some of them are strategic. So disease foundations, they have a passion. They want to solve a disease problem. So they're going to listen to you, and a lot of them have a fair amount of money. So it can be very meaningful money. And interestingly, if you go to a disease foundation and get the blessing of a disease foundation, that actually helps if you're getting angel investors in, because they feel more comfortable that somebody who knows the science really well has blessed what you're doing. So you got to spend a ton of time Googling and researching, and I guess let's see where. Yeah, I guess I'll talk about that in another slide, about where do you actually find them. So if you're talking about traditional venture funds, there are some major filters that you have to think about. And the one I just said is the financing is the right size. That to me cuts out. If you need $5 million to get to first in human studies, or what the digital health equivalent would be, 10 million in revenue, you don't go to a fund that has to invest 20 million or 50 million at a time in a financing. And venture funds are very good, for the most part, about saying on their website what their financing size is. And you need to just do the research and look them up. So I think that's, you just have to, you might hear the name and then you go look at the website and figure out, oh, they're going to be too big. Or you look at the portfolio that the last 3 deals they've done, and they're all, $100 million deals, it's not going to be a good fit. So you also, and this is sort of subtle, and again, you have to get it through reading, you need to find funds that just raise their money, because a newly closed fund has capacity. That's when they're the most active in terms of finding their first investment in a company. And that allows them to still make maybe 2 or 3 more investments in that company with that fund. They don't like to start a new company at the end of their fund life, because there are all kinds of conflicts of interest about, it's just complicated. But the best time is to look for a fund that is recently closed. And I'll talk about how to find them. So the investor has capacity. That sort of comes with if it's newly closed. Having an internal champion is so important, and you won't know this looking from the outside. You won't know this until you begin to have discussions, but you've got to figure out whether the people you're talking to are really excited about what you're doing, or are they just, checking the box and having a discussion so that they can report back that they talked to X number of companies. Investing in a company takes a lot of work. So you have to find somebody who's excited enough that they're going to put aside all the other activity they're doing and managing companies to do the due diligence, to hire outside experts, to talk to the company 25 different times, to build an internal consensus. It's a lot of work. So you've got to find somebody inside who's an advocate. Valuation in the investor's comfort zone. That tends to be, yeah, you probably won't find that out till later. You need to be at the right stage of development and in a space that's in scope. So the best bet is just to look at companies that they've already invested in, and does it look like the kind of company you are? So right stage of development, for example, a lot of funds will not talk to you unless you're 6 months from the clinic. They don't want to talk to you if you're earlier than that, if you're still optimizing leads. So that puts you out of the ballpark right away. And again, sometimes they say that in their websites. Some of the better funds do try and give you some guidance about what's in their sweet spot. In a space that is in scope, you won't know that necessarily till you start talking to some people, but some funds won't do Alzheimer's. They think it's a graveyard. Some people won't do, won't, like us, we won't do cannabis. So, but we try and be honest. If you come, we'll tell you right off the bat that it's just not a fit. So how do you find this? So first, I think the pandemic has been actually a very interesting time. And in some ways, raising money has been easier in the pandemic than before, because investors, nobody's traveling. People have been going to conferences on Zoom. There are lots of ways to meet. They've had more time to have Zoom meetings. So I think investors and companies alike find it almost easier than it was before the pandemic. And it'll be very interesting to see how much of that survives, how much of it's going to be virtual. I think there was a thought that investors will never invest in a company if they haven't met the team in person. And that has turned out not to be the case. People have gotten comfortable with it. So I do think if you really don't have any network and don't have the first clue who investors are, then you really should sign up for some of these conferences, at least one, to get your feet wet. I think Resi has been pretty interesting. Resi is reinventing early stage investing, and their conference is actually this week. They have probably 4 a year, I think. So they have them pretty often. A lot of these other ones are annual. Resi does them the most frequently. They do a good job. They do a good job, not with traditional venture funds, but with non-traditional investors. And that's sort of their specialty. And I think it's very hard to find some of these non-traditional investors. So I've found Resi to be the best way of doing that. And I go to it myself sometimes just to meet the investors, not necessarily to meet just companies. So biotech showcase is usually in January. So that'll keep an eye out for that. Bio is so-so. I mean, it's a little expensive, so I can't completely endorse it. Life Sciences Summit, that's happening in November, I think, up in New York. And historically, they've gotten good fun. I didn't go to it last year, so I don't know how it was last year. HIMSS is on the digital health side. There's also a conference called HLTH, which is not so much where companies meet investors, but it's just everybody who is an investor goes to that conference. So you need to get to know, again, PCI probably has a pretty good sense of the value of some of these conferences. Now, the trick is investors get in free to these conferences. And the only way the conference organizers can get away with that is because they charge the companies to go. So you aren't going to want to go to every conference because it's going to be too expensive, but you really should try and select one early on just to get a feel for who does what, because investors probably wouldn't go to the conferences if they had to pay. So that's just a fact of life. It doesn't seem fair, but that is how it is. And certainly the free way to see who might be good investors are to read. There are a multitude of newsletters, although I would say the world is dominated now by the Fierce newsletters. That's like, if you look up Fierce Biotech, they also have probably 5 or 6 sister publications like Fierce MedTech and Fierce Healthcare and Fierce this and Fierce that. So you can really find a newsletter that sort of suits the space you're in. It's totally free. Way too many ads. It kind of drives me crazy these days, but it is free. PitchBook News is very good. It's also free. It tends to be a little bit more techy oriented than biotechy, but it's still, it's a great place to find out. Because they track and they have data and they publish data about who's raising funds. So it's your best source to find out who's raising funds, and who's closing on a new fund and how well did their old fund do. I mean, they collect data and have very valuable reports that most VCs pay attention to. The other local one that I think is very interesting is Big 4 Bio. We're a sponsor, so I'm biased. And interestingly, we're the fourth. They have Boston, San Francisco, and San Diego and Philadelphia. They don't have New York, which partly is because we snuck in and asked them to sponsor Philadelphia. And I don't know why people from New York didn't think about doing it, but it's a daily newsletter. It's life sciences focused. It just talks about it's digital health and regular therapeutics and things like that. And it talks about all the different people who are raising money, what their product developments, who's doing what, changes in management, it's just a gossip sheet. So, but I recommend it, and it's free. So you can sign up for as many or as few of those as you want. Okay, a little bit about BioAdvance. What's our time? Okay, let me just spend a minute or two. So we got started 20 years ago, oh my God, with $20 million from Pennsylvania. We're a little unusual because we're an evergreen fund. And that means we don't have to go out every couple of years and raise a fund. We get returns from our companies and then recycle them back into our funds. So we have grown over the years. We're now $75 million. The fact that we're an evergreen fund means that we can come in earlier than the rest of the world, and we can stay longer. We're sort of more patient capital than a traditional venture fund. So we're a good fit to come in early, and that's what we have historically done. We invest in pre-seed, seed, Series A. If you come to us with a Series B, a company that's raising money at Series B, we can't do it because we really like to get to know a company from the beginning and get to grow with the company. So we are only human health, therapeutics, diagnostics, devices, digital health. As I said, we don't do cannabis because we don't think it's proven health, a health treatment. Oh, that may change over time. We now invest $1.5 million per financing. That tends to be more on the therapeutic side, but I guess, well, we invested in Right Air, which is a med tech spin out of Penn, and I think we invested $1 million in that round. And we internally debate all the time whether we need to be increasing this, because we do have money that we could make it a larger investment. It's usually just that the company is so risky that we don't want to invest more than this. So it's just our guide.
Jake Brenner's on our call.
Hey, Jake. We invest up to $5 million per company. So, and again, I think these are soft guidelines. We really do have the flexibility to go bigger. And we're always talking about what is our role and what's the best, what does the region need at this point in terms of size of financings. The biggest filter for us is the Mid-Atlantic focus. Even before COVID, we had a no planes, no hotels rule. And during pandemic, that certainly played out well. So we have a hard time doing deals in Pittsburgh, but we can easily do deals in Maryland or DC and New York. So most of our out of the region deals have been in New York. But we keep looking. I mean, there's a lot going on in Maryland too. So we don't feel the need to have to get on airplanes and go to stay in hotels. There's plenty of good stuff and we're in an underserved area. So we're happy with our competitive location. So we've invested in almost 100 companies, 53 million. We brought in $4 billion of capital. So these are some of the deals we've done. Again, it's a very eclectic portfolio, a recent portfolio. Right Air we just mentioned. MedTech, Vestech was also MedTech. Serpent is cell therapy. Immunogenesis, we're bucking the trend, and it's immuno-oncology, which is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Phrase Health is digital health, and it's a CHOP spin out. So we're very opportunistic. The size of investment goes from, well, I guess these are all pretty large investments. These are all, Phrase Health, we just actually did a pre-seed. So that was like a $75,000 investment. And we're looking now at their Series A. So Well, yeah. So at this point, these are the three things you got to do, and we could spend more time. And I think I just blabbed on too much. These are the three most important things for any investor, whether it's us or some other kind of resource. You have to solve an important problem that no one else does, that somebody is willing to pay for, and you can make money in a reasonable time frame. And that means if it takes you 10 years to get a product to the point where somebody's going to buy you or go public, it's probably too long. If you have to raise $100 million and there are only 20 patients that are going to benefit, but that means you need, if you raise $100 million, that means you have to be worth $1 billion. And how does that $1 billion get created if you only have 20 patients? So in that sense, the math doesn't work. You have to make sure the math works. You have to be able to create a lot of value with the least amount of money possible, and then in order for it to work for investors. And then you have to have the right team. If you look at the Penn spinouts, like Sargill always teams up with an experienced CEO. Jim Wilson actually could be a CEO himself. I think he chooses not to be, but so you see the good companies coming out of Penn, and they team up with good CEOs, and that's really important. It's got to be people who know what you don't know. And there are lots of subtleties to this. So I think I'm going to just move over. I'm going to just jump to my end slide. So what we do, we would love to talk to you. We'd love to talk to you even before you're ready to raise money. In fact, sometimes I think that's the most valuable interaction, is to tell you what you need to do with, say you have a grant that you're about to apply for. Well, here are the questions you need to answer. This is the kind of experiment you need to run. So we like talking to you really early before you're ready for prime time. As Laurie said, actually, we don't write a lot of checks. We're like every other investor. We don't write as many checks. We probably see 50 opportunities for every check we write, but we do really try and give you substantive feedback on what the issues are, what our concerns are. Sometimes they're fixable, so come back. We've seen companies come back 3 and 4 times before they get an investment. Other times it's not fixable, and we actually try and tell you that too, which is pretty valuable information. If we think it's like, no, this is never going to work, it just doesn't make sense, we try and, in the nicest possible way, say that. So we encourage you to come to us. We're always happy to chat. Best contact is Marnie McCoy, whose email is shown on this. And we have some information on our website, probably not as much as we should, but it's a little bit out of date, but check it out. So I hope to talk to you soon.
So how do you as a VC firm evaluate startups or opportunities given the recent trend of biotech startups using IPO as a fundraising strategy, pre-approval of any product?
Yeah, I hate that trend. It's like, and we just had a company use a SPAC. Renovacor is one of our companies, and they just closed a SPAC last week, which is sort of this new-fangled way to go public. I think it's crazy for early stage companies, and so I shouldn't say that, but I think early stage, it's so hard to do what you're doing, and there's such a high risk of failure scientifically at the very early stages, that to do it in the public light is just thankless. So it's just very hard to be successful, I think, when you have that kind of scrutiny, when you have to tell the world about every single little hiccup. So I'm not a big fan of it, and I don't encourage companies to go public. Sometimes companies are going public now as a last resort. I mean, because they can't get private money. So that's really scary when you see that. You can definitely see that there's some companies that have gone public that shouldn't have, but had no other choice and were able to access the public markets, which tells you something. So right. I'm not a big fan.
All right, that was very clear. Thank you for your thoughts there. The next question is, thank you, Dr. Schilberg, for this very clear and insightful talk. I agree with that. Any thoughts on the role of tech transfer offices in this new world if savvy VCs are building companies early on, including by contacting academics directly? What should tech transfer offices be focusing on? Just patent protection that's kind of a leading question because we're a tech transfer office.
Laurie, would you like to
hosting-
answer that question?
Well, no, I think we'd love to hear from it. Actually, be great to hear how we can be, what you think we should be doing that we may, are we doing the right things, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating question, and it has lots of different parts of the answer. I think there are a couple things. I do think making friends with the Versants and the Orbimeds and knowing them and knowing what they're looking for and having an open line of communication between tech transfer and what these funds are looking for their next big thing is an excellent. So it's establishing communications in a relationship. It's making it easy for them to come in and start companies, and get a license and do all the things that need to happen. I think for the situations where it's not the venture fund doing all the work, I think what PCI can do and is doing is finding good management people, good entrepreneurs to partner with the investigator. I think more needs to be done. I think our region is unfortunately a little short on really experienced management. So that to me is the biggest obstacle, because we can see really great science. And as an investor, we don't create companies. We don't, because we're small, we don't have the team. I mean, it actually takes a lot of work to create a company. So if we see great science, but we don't think you have a good management team or we don't know somebody who can step in and take over, we kind of can't, we're stuck. So it to me is the single most important problem in our region is solving the management shortage. And whether that means, again, we have these internal discussions like, should we be doing an EIR program, an entrepreneur in residence program? Do we need to pay a recruiting firm to go out and find people? So we need to all join together, but I think it's the biggest obstacle to pulling things out. But that's why when funds are willing to do that work themselves, the big funds that are $1 billion funds, they have plenty of resources, they have entrepreneurs they trust. So if they find a match with your science, then you just have to make it easy for them to access it and get it put in place. So it's two different paths. But it does center around management in both cases. Now, there's some very interesting models. There's a group called Perceptive Advisors. I think it's Perceptive Advisors, that is sort of an accelerator where it takes in technology that may not have all a complete management team, and they're funding it. So they're an accelerator, but with a fair amount of money. And they have recently invested in, I think, 3 deals in the Philadelphia area. And I think that's it's a great solution as well. So these intermediaries who are willing to take incomplete teams or just a scientific project that's intriguing and do the development themselves is also a great solution. So the world is trying to solve this problem in different ways. And PCI just needs to be keeping up good relationships with all the different the types of players that are out there now.
Yeah, and we spend a lot of time doing that, as you already alluded to, so thank you. Do you have any advice for graduate students interested in breaking into the biotech VC space?
Well, that's why I read some of these local newsletters, the Big 4 bios, to see what the new and up and coming well-funded companies are. I don't recommend you try and go out and set up your own company, frankly, when you're a recent graduate student. I think the best thing to do is to work in a high growth, exciting company that has money, where you can see how the management team functions and learn from what they're doing and sort of get a feel for what it's like to be in a small company. So look for the really cool companies and tag on and do anything they need. So find a good team to work with and learn from, and then you can think about going out on your own. But that's why I go back and look at the companies that are raising money. So we have some really exciting companies in this region alone.
Do you guide new companies into hiring service providers?
Yeah, we do. We sort of know who's not good. Well, we might know. That world has also gotten very complicated. Service providers, if you're talking about law firms and accountants, we definitely have a really good feel for who can help get started in the, with those kinds of services. But even CROs, like contract research organizations, most companies do send their science to a contract research group. They don't necessarily build a lab. So we have a pretty good feel for CROs in different spaces. So we try and help, yes.
I'll just say again, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us. This was really terrific, and I think was a very positive message for overall